The Federal Register for the Advanced Legal Research course at Boston College Law School. The Federal Register is the daily record of the executive branch of the federal government. It is published every business day. Each volume covers one calendar year, so the page numbers get very large toward the end of the year. It's still available in print, but most people tend to use it in one of its electronic forms. govinfo.gov has the complete Federal Register file back to 1936, as do Lexis, Westlaw, and Hein Online. One of the most usable forms is at federalregister.gov. The formatting used for documents on this website makes them easier to use. The website also provides quick links to the items in today's issue and advance notice of what will be in an upcoming Federal Register through the Public Inspection section. One of the most important functions of the Federal Register is to serve as the vehicle for federal rulemaking. Under the Administrative Procedures Act, rulemaking begins with a public notice which must be published in the Federal Register. Sometimes an agency will solicit public input even before drafting a proposed rule, but most of the time the notice is accompanied by published proposed rules. The proposed rules include the agency's reasoning and are required to be accompanied by information about how the public may comment on them. Some major rulemaking activities are accompanied by public hearings, but the primary method by which we, as members of the public, can comment on proposed rules is through electronic correspondence. Members of the public comment on proposed rules through the regulations.gov website. We can also read comments left by others. The agency is required to read and consider the comments made by the public. After the agency considers the comments, they revise, as they think best, the proposed rule and publish a final rule in the Federal Register. Published regulations take effect on the date stated in the final rule, often about a month in the future. This final publication of the regulation will include the agency's response to the comments received. The agency is not required to make the changes suggested by the public, just to read and consider them. The final rule as published in the Federal Register includes the changes that will appear in the next revision of that volume of the CFR. To find the history of a regulation, we just reverse the process. Start with the current regulation. Find the source statement, that is, the statement of where the final rules were published in the Federal Register. There is often a source statement for a whole CFR part, which applies to those CFR sections that don't have a separate source statement, like this section. Sometimes an individual section within a part will not have the same source as the part as a whole. This is what a section in the print CFR looks like with a separate source statement. It isn't labeled, but it appears in square brackets. Lexis calls these source statements history, and this is how the source statement for 36 CFR 1.1 looks on Lexis. And this is how the source statement for 36 CFR 1.2 looks on Lexis. Westlaw labels the source statement source. This is how the source statement for 36 CFR 1.1 looks on Westlaw. You may recall this section uses the source statement for the entire part, which is why it is followed by the words unless otherwise noted. For 36 CFR 1.2, Westlaw has printed both the source statement for the whole part and the separate source statement for the individual section. It can be confusing because the one that applies to this section is the one in parentheses. The one that has been outlined in blue, which includes the words unless otherwise noted, is the one for the whole part. The one outlined in red is the one for just this section. So if we're using a regulation, let's use, for example, 37 CFR 1.3, business to be conducted with decorum and courtesy at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. We see from the CFR that this section was last amended on June 30th, 2003, and the amendment was published in volume 68 of the Federal Register on page 38,624. I told you these page numbers get pretty large. So going to 68 Federal Register 38,624, which is the exact page the language that now appears in the CFR was printed on, we see that the Federal Register final rule begins on page 38,611. This rule was published on June 30th, 2003, but did not take effect until July 30th, 2003. The final rules include supplementary information, which has a discussion of specific rules, including Section 1.3 that we are researching. There's also a section that explains how the agency responded to the comments they received. The final rule will include someplace a citation to where the proposed rule was published. This section begins with a statement that the proposed rules for this regulation had been published at 68 Federal Register, page 14,365. Don't you love those page numbers? Unfortunately, there is no requirement the publication of the location of the proposed rules be standardized in any way, so the statement of where to find the proposed rules could be easy to find, like this one, or hidden in a footnote someplace. Looking at the original Notice of Proposed Rulemaking and Proposed Rule, we can see the agency's original reasoning for suggesting this change to the regulations. And looking at the original proposed rule, we see the agency added the sentence providing notice of non-entry after the comment period. It's nice to see an agency respond to the comments it receives. That encourages us to take part in the rulemaking process and comment on proposed rules that may have an effect on our lives. And given that legally we all have constructive knowledge of what was published in the Federal Register, you really should read the Federal Register every day. Just kidding.